She might need a little help from our friends to get started here.
A lot of help.
Oh, there you go.
Thank you. Let's see.
You can speak as long as you want.
Oh,
We're used to 2-hour sermons.
well, I promise we're not doing a 2-hour sermon. I just have to make sure that I can get this. They say get a Mac, so I get a Mac and it doesn't work, but it didn't work on my other computer either. So each one, Steve, has their own characteristics. So I'm going to see if I can't connect this, which it worked before. It takes patience too, which I don't always have. So good morning. You know, I've met some of you, and I had the privilege of spending time with you guys at camp meeting, but it has been entirely way too long since I have been in the interior, and I apologize for that. It seemed like the last time I was here, I believe, was in the summer of 2018 at camp meeting, and the next thing I know, it's 2023, and so how did that happen? But I am so excited to be here and to fellowship with you, and on behalf of the conference, I send their greetings to you, and as well as my dad and mom, Dell and Nikki Perkins, are with me. We're a team, and so wherever I am, there they are, in addition to 2 four-leggeds that come with us. So I want to spend this time talking to you mostly about Arctic Mission Adventure, and so I'd just like to know how many people have either just heard of Arctic Mission Adventure. Oh my goodness, okay, I'm so excited about that. Generally speaking, I have an audience that doesn't know a lot about Arctic Mission Adventure, and so I would like to take today, I'm kind of going around the conference just to kind of give an update and some context around Arctic Mission Adventure and why it is so important to Alaska and to our conference. So I know that we had a scripture reading, and the title says, "The Lord is our strength and deliverer." And generally, when we speak of missions, we generally put up the big, the piece that says, "Go out into the world and make disciples of the people, go to the nations, peoples, tribes," and so forth. And that is all very true. But what I have found in the almost 6 years that I have been here working as the development director for the Alaska Conference with a specific emphasis on Arctic Mission Adventure is that it takes incredible strength and prayer and diligence to do mission work. And I'm not talking about just in the mission field. I'm talking about day-to-day mission that you and I do when we go to the grocery store and when we go to our neighbor and we interact with people on a daily basis. How many of you feel like more than ever we are being hit with spiritual warfare? I know I am. I feel like even in my private life and in our conference work, it is not difficult. We are living in days that have been promised that we will have challenges. We will, when we claim the name of the Lord and when we bring people to Him, we will have a big bullseye on our back. And Satan is not going to be happy with that, and he's not going to rest and allow us to just go forth and bring people after people after people to Christ, because that goes in direct conflict with what his aim is. And so while we do have that directive to go out and touch people's lives, what we need now more than ever is to have the strength and of the Lord and live in the rock of his strength and his ability to keep us, because we cannot shirk from the duty of going out and continuing to preach him to people that don't know about him or that need to hear that he is our hope and our salvation. And so in most presentations, people give the summary at the end, but I really I wanted to give it at the beginning because the bottom line is that Arctic Mission Adventure, or your mission within the sphere of influence that you have, is all predicated on Jesus Christ and his blessing and his direction in bringing people to Christ. So I'd like to tell you that back in 2016, Arctic Mission Adventure was not doing very well. Okay, the Kincaids were an integral part and still are an integral part of Arctic Mission Adventure, but Ken Crawford had left, and we had a new president, a good president, and a good new team, but unfortunately, the financial state of Arctic Mission Adventure had declined to a point where we were in serious, and this is before my time, we were in serious times of possibly having to let our mission component of the conference go. And so the executive committee came together, and with the conference, they decided to put in about $80,000 for that year, because if they didn't put it in that year, we couldn't have operated. And so they committed to $80,000, and AMA was able to operate. And they did a couple of things. The first thing they did was they decided that in order for us being AMA, to continue, we had to create a different model. And so they decided to hire a fundraiser, which is unique in the church. People have different ideas about fundraising in the church. Some are for it, some are maybe not so supportive of it. But in this case, the reality was that in order for us to continue the mission component of our Alaska conference, we needed to provide and get funds, enough funds, to not only just continue, but to grow Arctic Mission Adventure so that it is sustainable every single year. So they hired a fundraiser, and they decided that because the Alaska conference is so small, the budgets then are small. So Arctic Mission Adventure, if we were going to continue to do what we felt God was calling us to do on the scale that God was calling us to do, the decision was made to not have Arctic Mission be a line item on the budget, but to rely on God and have faith that he was going to provide the funds necessary from 100% donations, as Jim had mentioned. And so those are the things that were decided around 2016. The other thing was to make sure that we were in line with what the constituency wanted, because this is what we felt as a conference was important, but we didn't know if this was in line with what our people wanted. And so at the constituency meeting in both 2016 and 2020, you guys told us what was important. And so the three main priorities of the conference became a new day. And what that means is that the discipleship, Arctic Mission Adventure, and youth and young adults became the three top priorities that you wanted your conference to focus on. And so I'm going to be talking about the Arctic Mission Adventure component, but what we've done in the almost 6 years that I've been here is to try to develop programming that is in line with moving discipleship forward, moving Arctic Mission Adventure forward, and moving youth and young adults forward. So you'll see some new faces in the conference. You'll see Ashwin. I mean, I'm sure many of you have met Ashwin, our new secretary, and John Winslow. Have you met John Winslow yet? He's our school superintendent. And so we have now a complete triad, if you will, of strong leaders that are pushing these priorities forward. And I'm hoping you'll get to meet them eventually. I'm sure we're all trying to make visits throughout the conference, so I know you'll get to meet them at some point. But I'm going to talk to you about Arctic Mission Adventure and kind of where we are with that. So since 2016, we came together just to decide what is our mission, what are our goals and objectives for AMA. And we came up with the idea that Arctic Mission Adventure, which is the Native Ministries arm of the conference, is a ministry that we are wanting to foster hope and healing in our Alaska Native communities through things like youth programs, family health programs, community outreach, and most especially in discipleship or evangelism. And the way we do that is obviously to go out into our Native communities. And so what's interesting is that, and again, this was so new to me. When I came to Alaska, I had no idea the complexity of our Arctic Mission Adventure in terms of where we work, the logistical aspects of the work itself. And so, as you probably know, we live in a state that is incredibly diverse with our Native people groups. We have over 11 different people groups spread across the state. And while there are similarities, there are some differences in terms of how they live their life, some of their traditions. I will say that unlike the lower 48 Native Americans, our Alaska Natives are some of the last people groups that live off of the land. And some of that is out of tradition. But as you know, when you go to the grocery store, some of this is out of necessity as well. I mean, it blows my mind when I first got here how expensive things were, and it's something that our lower 48ers just are blown away by. I was in Barrow not too long, and I went to the grocery store, and one avocado was $6. Okay, so I'm sure that doesn't surprise you guys, but even still, having been here, that still blew me away, and it wasn't really a very good avocado either for $6. And so we have our natives that are very much still tied to the land. They are distributed across the entire geographic area of Alaska. We have over 200 native villages. And to give you perspective on where we are and how much work we have left to do, we have a presence in only 11 villages, as you see on the map over there. Out of the over 200 villages. So again, it's a slow work. It's a work that takes time to build relationships in. It's a work that is not easy, and I'll explain a little bit in a little bit about why it's challenging for us to connect with some of our Native brothers and sisters. But the model that we have developed and that what we have been working towards is to ensure that we have parsonages and churches in just about every one of the villages that we are in. So if you were going to go to the St. Lawrence Island, 35 miles from Russia, you would know that in Gamble and Savunga, not only do we have a church, but we have a parsonage. And that is the case. That is in part, and if not a good part, because of the people that have gone before us, the Kincaids and the Crawfords and people like them that really came in and set the grassroots foundation of this Native ministry. And it's because of them that we are where we are today. We have the infrastructures where we do because they had the foresight through Jesus' leading to place those parsonages and churches in the places, in the areas that they're in. What I'm excited about is that in every single hub, does everybody know what a hub is, right? So a hub is the largest village in each of the territories, each of the regions that service the smaller villages around them. So Barrow is a hub. It services 7 different villages surrounding Barrow. Kotzebue is a hub, Nome, Dillingham, Bethel. And so with the exception of Kotzebue, we actually have a church and a parsonage in every single one of our hubs. Praise the Lord. in our hubs, we believe in a center of influence model. So what that means is that when we bring people to live in the villages and to work in the villages as an Arctic Mission Adventure worker, they are living in the parsonage, and they are responsible not only for the spiritual work that is being done there, but they're also responsible for the outreach component of it. And most times, while we do have some pastors that kind of serve the dual purpose, most of our AMA workers are bivocational, which means that they're either nurses or doctors or some other career, and they feel that God has asked them to, in addition to their career, they are serving as part-time Arctic Mission Adventure workers. And so in the hubs, what we are looking at is we're trying to stabilize our hubs in terms of the spiritual outreach, the community outreach, support in radio. We have radio stations in every single one of the villages that we are in. And we are able to have youth camps because we find that kids, when we can touch kids, that is the starting point. Those are the seeds that are planted. And those kids, when they are touched, go back home, and there is a connection. And then suddenly those parents are coming back, and they're saying, I want to know what you're telling my kid because it's made a huge difference in our lives. And I mean, that has been really the primary focus of Arctic Mission Adventure. I'll talk about this later, but we're starting to spread out into these different programs that we feel are just as important in reaching the adults, but we'll talk about that in a minute. The other aspect that we try to raise funds for is aviation. Now, aviation has changed. To the hubs, we can generally use Alaska Air to get to the hubs from Anchorage. Now, if you're going to some of the outlying villages, that's a little bit different. But as you know, costs are continually rising to get resources out from Anchorage to our hubs and our villages. And so we raise funds in support of aviation. We also raise funds for things like when the Kincaids go to Selawik in support of what we're trying to do. So that's the aviation component of it. Over the last 2.5 years, since COVID hit, many people did not even consider Alaska as a mission field. And so when they would talk about doing mission, they would go to Africa, or they would go to the Philippines, or they would go over the seas, because we've grown up thinking about missions relative to someplace else. We don't always think about missions in our own country, and especially in Alaska. But COVID hit, and it shut down travel. And all of a sudden, we got bombarded by people that wanted to do missions in Alaska. And we had to scramble because we really didn't, we were sort of going, we had a few people that wanted to come up, but we certainly did not have an organized program, an infrastructure to have people come up, big groups. We're talking 40 people, 60 people. And how many people have been out to a village? Okay, awesome. So you know what I'm talking about, that there are no Marriotts out there. There's no, it's not some place that you can take people and you can house them in a hotel and, give them breakfast, and it's a comfortable mission trip. That's just not happening. And so we really had to scramble to put together what we're calling our Alaska Mission Experience. And this is something that we are really promoting and that has multiplied just tremendously. We have gotten schools, Gem State, Southern, Andrews, all have brought groups up to our Alaska and into our villages. And it's been such a blessing because, as you know, we are too small to do all this work of ourselves. We do not have the resources that we need to do everything that we believe God is calling us to do. And so it is people like you guys, people like, other churches, not only here, but in the lower 48. We are looking for people that have an interest in helping in the villages. Whether it is helping in construction, whether it is doing a vacation Bible school, anything that can help us to bring the message out to our Alaska Native community. So I put this slide in primarily because when I'm talking to an audience that is not as familiar with our Alaska Natives, there's a lack of understanding the challenges. So I've spoken about the cultural challenges that it takes for us to be out in the village, the logistical challenges, the expense to actually get out there and maintain a parsonage and have somebody live out in the villages. But this slide truly represents the challenges that it takes and that we are working against to make a difference in our Native communities. And this is probably something that you all are very familiar with, but it begs to be repeated as to how challenging and difficult it is to actually reach individuals in the community. And it started back in the 1800s. And most of these variables or these factors are still being felt and influencing our adult people even to this day. So the history goes that there are 4 main events that have impacted our Alaska Native communities. Now, I will tell you that it's a lot more complex than that. You can't just point to 4 isolated variable and say this is why we have these challenges within our communities, but these certainly have been some of the larger impacts that we have seen that have created what we call generational trauma. And the first, again, this may be not news to you, but back in the 1800s, the different denominations of the time came in and they carved up Alaska. And so Catholics went one way, Protestants another. The Friends group is a big denomination in Alaska. And each one of them had their brand of Christianity, and unfortunately, many of them brought with them verbal, mental, and physical abuse. And so suddenly now our Native communities are equating Jesus Christ and religion with some pretty bad stuff. And that has carried over many generations and over much time. The second thing, as you've heard, and people say, well, residential camps or schools, that only occurred in Canada. Well, I'm afraid to say it did not. Many of our Alaska Natives, I have several friends who were taken to residential schools, and there were some pretty egregious things that occurred in those schools. And again, these are not just, that was the past. We are working with individuals that are still coping and trying to positively navigate through some of the situations that they were involved with. The third factor is, again, many people understand that the Japanese Americans were interned during World War II. But few may know that our Alaska Native communities, particularly in the Aleutian Islands, were interned. And they were interned in places like fish camps, places like degraded buildings that didn't have running water, didn't have food. And again, each one of these variables has done one of two things. It has reduced their self-worth. It has reduced or lessened their identity, and they have struggled to figure out how to navigate the impacts of the different situations that they find themselves in. Finally, most recently, there's been a disproportionately high rate of non-natives adopting Native children. Now, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm saying that if a child can be brought into a loving family regardless of, their background, their culture, that's wonderful. And we have some non-Native families in our church that have done an amazing job at bringing up Native children. But they have been very, very careful that they do not Anglicanize those kids. They make sure that they have a good combination of their background, their culture, the things that were important to who they are as people. And I think that's really key. So saying all of this, what we find in our villages is we find adults who have low self-esteem. And again, these are generalizations. I'm not here to say that every single Alaska Native falls under this pattern, but there are some serious challenges that come directly from these factors. And so you've got low self-esteem. And like any of us, when we've gone through trauma, what do? We find coping mechanisms, whether it's overeating, whether it's, what have you. In some cases it's depression, other cases it's substance abuse. Our Native people are no different. And so they use drugs, alcohol, overeat, and then they find themselves in a potentially violent situation where you've got physical violence, self-mutilation, any of those factors. And what we find is this behavior becomes normalized over time. And then the younger generations follow suit. And so we have this cycle of generational trauma that we are working within that is incredibly challenging. And so it's this kind of background that we find our workers going into. And we have to be so very careful that when we walk into these villages, we're not here to say, this is what you need to be doing. Because who are we to say that? Because many of us have not gone through these kinds of situations. And so we have to be so careful that we cannot call ourselves missionaries. We call ourselves Bible workers. We do not want to have this attitude of we are here to save you, because that's what the missionaries way back when were doing this. We are partnering. They know that they have some serious challenges. And when we can walk alongside our Alaska Native communities, that is the best combination, because we're not, saying we're better. We're saying, we care about you. Let's see if we can't find solutions. And more importantly, we are interjecting God into that equation. So that leads me to how do we operate, in our villages? It is so important, like I just mentioned earlier, that we cannot come in from a denominational perspective and say we have all the answers and you don't. And so what we have to do is reflect Christ. I mean, what did Christ actually do on this earth? He had, his first step was that he showed compassion. When he came across somebody that was hurting or that was down or whatever, situation they found themselves in, the first thing he did was he showed compassion. The second thing is, we can all show compassion, but unless we act on that compassion, unless we decide that it's not enough to just go, I feel sorry for you or I have empathy for you, it's to say, I can help, I can do something. And that's what Christ did. He took action. He healed the blind, gave sight to the blind. He healed the sick. He cast out devils. I mean, he was all about action. He was not passive in terms of, just sitting back. He was out there doing and working. He was non-discriminatory. So often, especially nowadays, we are so polarized in terms of who helps who, or does this person deserve it, or, I don't believe in the same way that they do, or they don't look the same, or they don't act the same as I do. And you know what? We don't have time for that. Christ was never like that. He said, I don't care what you look like. I don't care if you're a prostitute. I don't care about anything. I care about you as a person. I love you, and I'm healing you. And so he met people where they were. He took each individual and he looked directly at them. He may have had thousands of people on the hill that he was talking to, but unlike what we can do, he spoke directly to each person's heart. And isn't that what we need to be doing? Time is short. We don't have time to be divisive. We don't have time to go getting distracted about politics and everything that's going on. And that is Satan trying to keep our eyes off of Christ. What we need to be doing is serving Jesus and saying, I care about you as the individual. I may not condone what you're doing, but here, how can I help you? And so what happened, what was so cool is that once he did all of that, once he set that stage, they came to him and they said, what makes you different? Because I want to know more about it. And so that's when he sat down and he started teaching and he started changing hearts. And then finally, once he got people to the point where they were believing in him, that is when he turned and he said, okay, I want you to go and be disciples for me. And that truly is the model that we are trying to emulate in our AMA communities. It is our goal, our primary goal, to put people in the villages, yes. To reach out and touch people, yes. To help out in the communities, to spiritually change people, yes. But we do not want to keep our workers in one village over years and years and years. The idea is, how do we raise up Native leaders who can be on fire? Because they're going to have the most important impact in their own communities. And we'll talk about one of our Native leaders in a little bit. But that is the goal, the true goal of Arctic Mission Adventure, is to raise up Native leaders because they are going to have the most important impact on their brothers and sisters in the village. Okay, so that's I wanted to take that time because not everybody understands the context of AMA and where we've been, where we are. And so I'd like to take the rest of this time to just give you some stories and just talk about some of the places that we've been in. And so we're going to start in the very north part of the state, but also in Utqiagvik. Took me a while to learn how to say that. We have the most northern Seventh-day Adventist church in the entire denomination. And it took us, what was it, Steve, 25 years before we got that church? A long time. Okay. So between 25 and 60 years? Okay. The bottom line is that congregation had been praying for a very long time that they could raise up a church. And your pastors, your former pastors, Zach and Celesta, worked with them. And to this day, they have a church that they are worshiping in. Not only do they have a physical church that they're worshiping in, they are doing amazing, amazing work. And the two things I'd like to just kind of highlight today are baby boxes. Are you guys heard of the baby box program? Okay, so cool. So unfortunately, Alaska has some of the greatest incidences of SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome. And you know what happens is some of these homes are pretty small, and there's a lot of people in there, and so they don't always have the appropriate bedding or beds structures for their children, their newborns, and so oftentimes they'll put them in the bed with them, and accidents happen. And so Yvonne and this is Yvonne on the upper left-hand photo. She and her colleagues in the congregation have created what we call a baby box. And what it is it has a little mattress in it, and they provide all kinds of new mother things. And they go up and they give a baby shower, and they teach mothers how to properly handle their baby, but also what safe sleep is all about. And it started just very small, but now they're being asked to. They're working with the University of Alaska in Anchorage, the AHEP program, and so they're actually touring all around the Northwest Territory or Northern Slope Territory to give this safe sleep training, so that we can do our part to keep our baby safe. And it's amazing what the doors have opened and the people that have come to ask more not just about safe sleep training, but then what makes you different? It's again that principle. What makes you guys different? How come you care so much about us? And I'd like to know more. The second piece of outreach that they're conducting right now is called the QPR training, and that is suicide prevention training. Now, I don't know if you guys have heard, but suicide in general in our country is out of control. But in Alaska, it is 3 times the rate. And more importantly, in our Alaska Native communities, it's quadruple that. And I will tell you that it's the saddest thing to know that God's people are dying. They're dying. And we have an opportunity in our outreach, in the work that we do, to give them hope and to let them know that there's a Jesus Christ that is there for them and that they don't have to die. And so what the Barrow Church is doing is they have been certified in this suicide prevention training, and they have worked with a borough, and they have been asked to go to 7 villages outside of Barrow to conduct this QPR training. And we are gearing up now to do a second phase of this offering by providing grief recovery workshops. Because the first time we did a grief recovery workshop was in Togiak, and we did a circle, a talking circle, and we had 15 women that were there, and they were very quiet. Didn't want to open up, very hard. It's hard to talk about grief, but when you are culturally different, it can be very challenging. And so the one thing that my Native friend told me, she said that these people don't think non-natives grieve. They don't think that they have any problems. And it is so important for you to show that you grieve just like everybody else. And so we had 3 non-natives in the group, and each one of us shared how we had lost something very dear to us. And by the end of it, the whole circle was crying, and they opened up in ways that I have never seen before. And it's that combination of showing compassion, taking action, making a difference in somebody's lives. And so what we're doing here in Barrow is we are having Yvonne and her group become lay experts in 2 aspects of an outreach that we can then take all across Alaska. And so they're going to be responsible for the QPR and the baby box. And part of the funding that we are using is to take them to a Togiak, take them to a Bethel, because while there are differences in the different people groups, there are very, very strong similarities in suicide, in grieving, in substance abuse. And so what we're trying to do is develop these lay experts, and you guys could be part of this. You know what your talents are, you know what you guys can do, and we would love to have you be part of serving on a lay expert team that can help in our communities. So we moved to Selawik, and I believe that's where the Kincaid started out. Am I correct? Yeah. And so we have Ed and Jose there. Unfortunately, they both have been experiencing quite a bit of health issues, and for several months we thought that they were going to have to leave us. And it was very discouraging because this couple comes from Puerto Rico, and they end up in some of the coldest areas in Alaska. But they have just been used by God in ways that I can't even fathom. They have developed with the city a multi-purpose building that was just basically run down. And the city said, if you can construct this back up, we'll let you rent it for $1 in perpetuity. And so they have brought in soup kitchens, they have brought in food banks, they do kids programs there. I mean, it's just amazing how much they have reached out to the community and how well they're loved. And there's, like I say, when they had to leave because of these medical issues, it was a real challenge, because how do you replace somebody like an Edna and Jose? But we know that it's not about the people, it's about the work. And so if they were having to leave, we know that God will raise people up to replace them. But it's certainly a walk by faith, because it is not easy to find people that are willing to sacrifice. I mean, we're looking at people that go out into the native villages. I mean, this is akin to, the first missionaries that went out into these countries that had never had people in them. You're giving up, you're sacrificing. I'm not sure I could do that if God was calling me to do it. I live in Anchorage, and it's a sacrifice. And so we are always having to ask God to provide for people, because we need strong people that can be in there. We are down 50% of all of our villages. We are down 50%. That means that 50% of our villages are empty right now with nobody in them. Well, let me go back. So we're praying, because it looks like their medical issues are improving. They are out in Selawik right now. They had just come back from Florida. They've been here since, in Selawik since June. And they called up, they talked to me last week, and they are praying that God will extend their time and enable them to do mission work part-time. So part-time they would spend in Florida, and then the other part of the time they would spend in Selawik. So please keep all of our workers in prayer and all of our places in prayer, but in particular Edna and Jose, as they God leads them in the path that He wants for them. So Gamble and Savunga, I went to the ASI convention, when was it, in August, and we had a whole display. And the one thing that I absolutely love telling people is, I said, you can see Russia from Alaska, and it's not really Sarah Palin's, time, but it's truly from the St. Lawrence Island. And so we had a big picture of Gamble, and in the background you could see the mountains of Russia, and it just blew people away. There's people have this conception about Alaska that they get on a cruise and they go and it's all the beauty, and it is all that, right? But there's so much more about Alaska that is evident to me, that God is working and moving in Alaska, and there's so much more work to be done. So if you look at Gamble and Savunga, this is where I was referring to our native leaders. So Chris Kanuka, or Petu, is at this point our only native leader, and he's in Gamble. And the cool part is this, that he really never had an interest of leading until our last Bible worker left. And all of a sudden, God raised him up to a point where he is actually a ministerial student at Andrews University. And so his passion is to become a minister, to go back to St. Lawrence Island and to Gamble and to raise people up for Jesus Christ. And he has baptized 12 people so far in the short period of time that he's been out in Gamble working. And again, these are part-time workers. These are not full-time. He is a teacher, he's a father, he's a mission worker, and yet he is baptizing people into the name of, into our faith. If you look at Savunga, we have Eloise Hawks. And again, if we think that these are young people that can only do the work, Eloise Hawks has been out in Savunga for, I would say, since 2010. She lost her husband. She went out originally with her husband, and he passed away. And instead of going back to the lower 48 and kind of ending the mission part of her life, She kept coming back, and she has been working with her people. And it was amazing to me because we went out there, and her people think of her as a saint, Saint Eloise, if you think about that. But they depend so much on her. The Seventh-day Adventist Church is the only church that is now operating in Savunga. There used to be another one, but it got too hard for the pastor and his wife to live in Savunga and run that other denominational church. But not Eloise. She lost her husband, but yet she is dedicated to bringing people to Christ. And let me just tell you that she, because of her work, there have been 11 people that were baptized in the last month. And if you think that it's just happening now, the history of one of the gentlemen that you see in this picture, his history is that his grandfather was the very first Adventist on the island, but in Savunga. And he contracted tuberculosis and had to be sent to a sanitarium in Seattle. And they thought they were going to lose him. And he sat in that room, laid in the bed, for a year and a half, trying to recover from tuberculosis. And there was, it was so foreign to him. He came off of an island into this metropolitan area, into a hospital room. And there was nobody that looked like him, talked like him, related to him. And the only thing that he had was a radio. And he listened to that radio station every single day. And he'd go and he'd turn the dial to try to find something that appealed to him. So one morning he was listening to it, and he dialed into this station that was this gentleman talking, and he heard things that he had never heard before. And so every morning then, at the same time, he would dial into that station and he would listen for an hour. And it changed his life. And by the end of the time that he was there, he realized that, let me just tell you, it was our HMS Richards in Voice of Prophecy that he was listening to. And by the time that he got done with his treatments, he gave his heart to Jesus, and he was baptized in Tacoma, Washington. And he went back to Savunga. And he was a very important man in Savunga. He ran the mail. He would run dog sleds back and forth between Nome, Savunga, and Gamble, running the mail. And he was very well thought of. But when he came back, he went back and he started espousing this new ideology and religion. People shunned him. But he didn't give up. He truly, truly believed in his God. And so he spoke to his wife, he spoke to his friends, and it took 2 years before his wife was baptized. It took another year before his whole family was baptized. And now you see his grandson, and his great-grandson baptized. So his legacy continues, and this is what happens when we touch people for Christ, when we take action, when we move. This is what God is calling each of us to do. Finally, we spoke about Bethel, we talked about Bethel. Bethel is now being worked by 2 young ladies. One is a doctor, one is a lawyer. Again, they do it part-time, but they are growing Bethel. That church is become so big that we have to do something to expand it. So we're working on a capital campaign to expand it. They do homeless ministry, they do kids programs, they do health ministries, and that church is busting at the seams. Not only are they working in Bethel, but they are working outside in the villages, outside of Bethel. And this is what's so cool about where we are today. It's taken us so many years to get our hubs up and running, our hubs solid, our hubs in a way that we can sustain it. And for the first time, we have Barrow, Bethel, Dillingham, Nome, where we are starting to go outside of the hubs, and we are actually making a difference in the smaller villages. And that's the first time since I've been here. So God is moving. And finally, Togiak, I told you a little bit about that, where we are, again, doing clothing ministries. There's so much hurt. You know, one of our clothing ministries, there was a gentleman that came, and he said, I have nothing, and I'm here to try to get some clothes that I can wear. So Pastor Todd sat down with him and started talking to him, just being a friend, you know, just saying, how can we help? And by the time he was finished, they had set up Bible studies, and he was baptized not too long ago. And so I hope that what you see is that there's a pattern here, that when we go out, and it's not just a pattern with our Alaska Natives, this is what we should be doing on a day-to-day basis. This is what God is calling us to do when we encounter anybody at the grocery store or what have you. We are to care about people. We are to stop what we're doing long enough that we help the people that God has put in our path. We are all missionaries. We are all called to make a difference for Jesus Christ. Last thing, you guys may have heard about Typhoon Merbok, and I just want to just tell you that this was we don't ever want disasters to we don't want to use disasters as a mechanisms to profit or to do anything like that. But we were really blessed to be able to help when Merbok hit. We were put into contact with the mayor of Unalakleet, and we've never had any contact in that village, so it's a brand new village to us. I called him up and I said, what do you need? And he told me, he said, I need water, we need diapers, we need all this. And every one of our churches galvanized to support. We raised $10,000 worth of first responding, resources like diapers and water. We sent it out to him, and I said, what else can we do? And he said, our elders, our older people, all of their subsistence food is gone because the electricity is out. We need generators. And I said, well, how many do you need? And he said, we need 60. And I thought, well, that's a tall order. And so we prayed about it. And the next thing we know, you guys gave us enough funds. Our people supported enough to give 40 generators of the 60. And he was so thankful because he couldn't believe that an organization would take the time to care about the village of Unalakleet. And he said, we are being blessed by so many, to us, unknown. We don't know who's blessing us or who's supporting our community, but God knows. And that we have developed a rapport and a relationship so that we are now moving into Unalakleet to see how we can help in addition to just the Merbok piece of it. But how, is there grief resources that we can give you? Are there kids programs that we can do? So this was a huge opportunity to come together and walk with our brothers and sisters in the Unalakleet. So what does this all add up to? This is the ultimate goal. This is it. Not only for us to do what it takes to be counted among the worthy here, but it's our responsibility to be so close with Christ and to be so connected that when he calls us to action, when he calls us to touch somebody, when he gives us divine appointments in our everyday life, that we act on those. Because this is what it's all about. This is, Christ is coming. He's coming soon. We don't have time for all of the other distractions. And I know that when we get to heaven, there's going to be our Alaska Native brothers and sisters that we have helped through you guys that are going to say, thank you. I'm here because of you. May God bless you.